when I was, what was I, probably 8 or 9, whenever World War II started, there was rationing on gasoline, tires, food, a lot of food. We saw very little fresh fruit. Say, think Hawaii would be where we would have gotten our pineapple or our bananas from. That was a way rare treat for us, for Mother to have found some in the store. We were limited on the amount of sugar we could, and flour, and I don't remember that butter was ever hard. I guess Dad was maybe still in a creamery business. But so we didn't travel very much. Maybe we got up to Preston occasionally and saw my grandpa, and I think I was just into high school when he died, but he had married again, and so he did have a wife. But also, my step-grandmother also lived in Preston, so we loved being at her place. They kind of had a farm as a family, her brothers and sisters and whatever, and so we'd go out to the farm and be with Aunt Esther. That's where we really enjoyed being up there. But after the war, then I remember the first trip we took any further than that was to go to Yellowstone. And that was an experience, because by then I was 12, I think, when the war finally ended. And so, you know, maybe the next summer we went to Yellowstone, and I think maybe the year after that we went to California, saw the ocean for the first time. My dad had a couple of aunts that lived in different places in California. Actually, his dad's sisters who had immigrated here. Never joined the church, of course, but we saw them, and we just went from Los Angeles area on up to San Francisco and back to Salt Lake. So that was a fun trip. We didn't get lots of trips. My dad didn't like camping. To get him to go camping someplace was really an occasion. Damn flies were all over the food. But I do remember going up to Brighton one time with another family. It was during the war time, because they were people that were here doing something with the war time, and staying overnight. Arlen and Glade and I used to sleep outdoors once in a while in the summer. That was always fun, to just lay there on the grass and look at the stars, and there'd be a shooting star every so often, and that was camping for us, I guess. The boys got their camping through scouting, I think. Dad wasn't a camper. The first car I remembered we had was when we lived in Sugar House, so I was somewhere between 4 and 7, I guess. Dad had an old Ford. I remember you had to get out with the crank, and get still, thing again. To get it going. Maybe we'd go out to Holiday on Sunday afternoon or something and see my grandfather and his wife out there. And so I remember that car. Later we had an old 36 Chev, and that's what we had that had to get us through the war years. I think with baling twine and chewing gum, I'm not sure holding it together. It was worn out when the war was over, and you didn't get cars right away because they did not make any cars for we people. They were making things to fight the war with. And so that's when we could finally get one. And Dad never bought a new car. He bought used cars. Well, he bought a Pontiac, I think, and at that point, and and he had a Chrysler that he bought after that time. I can't even remember if I was still at home or if he bought it after, but he had that car so long that we'd kid and say, we're going to when Dad dies, we won't need a coffin. We'll just bury him in his Chrysler car. He was very attached to that one. So we did go a long ways with cars, for instance.
When did you first drive?
Well, I tried to learn to drive with my mother and my dad. They were about as patient as I am. And it was way too much for me. I just gave up. But when I got married, I learned to drive. Or George taught me to drive, I guess. But there was no driver's ed. You know, we don't learn in school like they do now and be prepared. And of course, there weren't as many cars on the road. My girlfriends all drove, so, you know, got rides with them when we were doing things together. But I didn't learn to drive then. We had a radio, stood about this high, I would guess, on legs that were about this high. So it was this big, you know. And a cabinet, you know, wood and all this. And we just had one. And we listened to the radio. I don't remember listening to the radio till I was big enough to understand vocally the plays that were, or the whatever was coming through the radio. But as we got older, I think we did have another small one somewhere later when we were teenagers probably. Liked listening to the music. We didn't get a TV until just before Arlen came home from his mission. Got it for Christmas that year, and he came home in January. And there wasn't much on the TV in those early days. I did babysit for people who were well enough fixed to have a TV before that. It wasn't very good anyway, only black and white. And we had such interesting things as watching a little class of little girls in their learning to tap dance or something, you know. I mean, not entertaining anyway, who cared? But once they got I Love Lucy on, then we got one. And things got better from there, but we didn't have all the modern things now. I was baptized in the Tabernacle in Salt Lake City. I'm sure probably the first Saturday in February, because my birthday was in January, and there were two other boys in our ward who also had January birthdays, so we're in there together. When I see the cute little dresses the little girls are baptized in now, I just go like this. It looked like long john underwear that they put on us, girls and boys. I mean, talk about embarrassing. And two boys from my ward, and went to school with them. Not nice. The church has come a long way since then. You know, interestingly enough, my dad did not. I think he worked on Saturday morning till noon. That was our time to go. It was one of the priests from one of the other wards in the stake who actually baptized me. And sadly enough, he didn't confirm me either. We hadn't been in the ward very long. Like I say, I was 7.5 when we moved to Holiday, and then my birthday was in January, so we'd been there 5 months maybe. And one of the bishopric confirmed me. I never quite understood why my dad didn't, you know, and I think they just didn't ask him to, or if he wanted to, or I don't know. I always wondered about that. Mom and Dad were married in the temple and always active in the church. Interestingly enough, though, I can't remember how old I might have been, at least 10 or 12, I would be guessing, when friends that Dad had grown up with said, "You got to come and go to the temple." They'd never been back to the temple, which is strange to us now because we have so many temples and are encouraged to do it. They must not have been, but they did, and then they attended the temple fairly regularly the rest of their lives.
Where'd you go to elementary school?
Holiday School in Holiday, Utah. You know, during the war, well, we never had a school bus anyway, but during the war, you had to live 2 miles from school. We lived 1.5 miles, so we walked to school most of the time. But we had a neighbor who had a daughter, I think she was Glade's age, really, but her dad and her grandpa both lived in the same house there. And they left for work about the time we would be walking to school, and we could ride in their car. We called the grandpa Papa Grew. His last name was Grew. But he had a little car. He didn't have a back seat, but you could lift up the trunk in this little old car, put a board in there to hold it up, pile as many kids in there as you could. And so we rode to school a lot of the time in grade school that way, not later. Well, by the time I was in junior high, the war was over, so then people could get gas. I don't think my mother started driving. My mother had driven some as a young person and gotten scared to death, and she never got back behind that wheel till one of the neighbors, I think a lady who was there, moved into our neighborhood because of the war. Her husband had a wartime job, whatever it was, and she said, you have to learn to drive. So she got her out and taught Mother to drive then. So sometimes she'd come down and pick us up from junior high, but we really had to do a lot of walking back then. And then I went to junior high, Olympus Junior in Holiday, and then to Granite High School, which was 9 miles away. So we did have a bus then. Before that, no buses. Schools were too close. But I remember one time, it was a beautiful spring morning, or spring day, and we decided, several of me and my girlfriends decided we'd walk home from high school. Whew. I didn't never do that again. That was a long, long way to walk. For me, I wasn't used to that much walking. But yeah, it was quite a ways. So, but we did have a school bus then.
Did you like school?
Yeah, I liked school. I didn't hate school, and it was fun to be with all the kids. School was fun. I got B's, B plus, basically in that area. Occasional A, and occasional C. Some classes were harder than others,
Were you involved in any sort of extracurricular clubs, activities, teams? Did you do
Now, when you lived 9 miles away from the high school, you didn't have a way to get home after school if you stayed for those extracurricular things. So I didn't. I couldn't sing. I didn't. They used to call them an opera or operetta. They really weren't. I remember they did a play every year. One time it was Song of Norway. One time it was, what is that one? Well, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, I didn't get involved in them. After high school, I got a job because I had learned to type. Almost everybody did. And with the old typewriter that you had to return the carriage by this way. They weren't electric. They were very manual. And I learned to take shorthand. So I worked in a office, a finance company. People borrowed money and paid it back, through there, and that's where I worked.
What was the name of the company?
Capital Finance.
In Salt Lake?
In Salt Lake. So I took the bus to Salt Lake and went to work and took it back home again at night. And walked about 3 or 4 blocks from the bus line back home.
Where was it in Salt Lake?
2nd South Main, the old Continental Bank. I think there's a restaurant in there. I don't know what the rest of the building is full of, because it was like, I can't remember how many stories. I worked on about the 5th floor, and I know it went on up maybe to...
Which corner there?
Let me see, the southwest corner.
Bambara's there.
Bambara, that's the name.
There,
yeah, that's what. Oh, it's a hotel now then. Oh, okay. I couldn't remember what was upstairs.
Yeah.
Obviously something is.